very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree, that's what we like
Absolutely.
on Jubes and Kerr.
Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing. I'm Arlene Foster and here's what's coming up over the next hour. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has presented his Brexit deal on Monday. We'll be speaking to DUP MLA Gordon Lyons and the CEO of Retail Northern Ireland. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be giving evidence to the Privileges Committee on the week commencing the 20th of March as part of the Partygate inquiry. Our political reporter Catherine Foster will be joining us to give us all the latest on the political stories around. Plus, it's been 2 years since Sarah Everard was kidnapped and murdered, a case that shocked the nation and raised questions for the police about the need to tackle violence against women. So, that's all in the show today, but I want to hear from you. Give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. But first, here's the news with Rihanna.
Arlene, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Commons Privileges Committee says breaches of coronavirus rules in Downing Street would have been obvious to Boris Johnson at the time. The former Prime Minister is set to give evidence about Partygate and whether he lied to Parliament at the committee inquiry on March the 20th. Mr Johnson says it was his belief the rules and guidance had been followed and that there's no evidence he misled Parliament. Well, Mr Johnson's also spoken out about the appointment of Sue Gray as Keir Starmer's new Chief of Staff, calling it particularly concerning. The senior civil servant led an independent investigation into Partygate. It was announced yesterday she was leaving the civil service to join the Labour Party. Conservative MP Jacob Rees-Mogg calling for a proper inquiry into the appointment, saying it invalidates her report into lockdown breaches at Number 10.
Former MP accepted her 2 reports on the strict understanding that she was impartial, and that now looks wrong. No confidence can be placed in the evidence she secured or passed the police, so instead there should be an investigation into her and to her appointment. We should have an inquiry into what she has done and her contacts with Labour whilst she's been a civil servant, particularly those with the office of the Leader of the Opposition.
Further leaked WhatsApp messages by Matt Hancock suggest his team asked if they could lock up Nigel Farage for being a pub hooligan and breaking lockdown rules. The messages revealed by The Telegraph were allegedly sent in 2020 after Mr Farage shared a video of himself drinking at a pub. A fortnight earlier, he was at a Trump rally in the US. Under COVID lockdown rules, anyone coming to England from abroad was required to quarantine for 14 days or face a £1,000 fine. At the time, Mr Farage said he wasn't breaking quarantine rules. However, he's since said he probably was.
When I was photographed that day the pub's open, had I reached the full 14 days? Well, it was a bit nip and tuck. I think probably I hadn't quite reached the time. I always made sure I used hand sanitizer. I always kept my distance from people. And I have to say, you know, bad laws make people lawbreakers.
The King and Queen Consort will make their first state visits to France and Germany at the end of the month. Buckingham Palace says the 6-day trip beginning on the 26th of March will celebrate Britain's relationship with both countries, marking shared histories, culture and values. The royal couple will travel to Paris and then onwards to Berlin. The trip will include a number of firsts, including the King being the first British monarch to give a speech from France's Senate chamber. The HS2 project could be delayed in an attempt to curb rising costs. That's according to the project's chief executive. The line's supposed to be providing a faster rail service between London and Manchester, but there are reports it may no longer run to its planned terminal at Euston as a cost-saving measure. Well, the project's chief executive now says the impact of inflation means they're having to look at ways of reducing costs further, including the timing and phasing of the project. A reality TV star has been sentenced to 21 months in prison for sharing online a private video of him having sex with his ex-girlfriend. Stephen Bear was accused of circulating footage of himself and Georgia Harrison having sex in his garden in August 2020. 28-year-old Miss Harrison, who's waived her right to anonymity, says she demanded the clip never be shared. Bear, who denies all charges, was found guilty of voyeurism as well as disclosing private films with intent to cause distress. Ms. Harrison says she's relieved it's over.
Today's sentence is a vindication of what I've been put through and sends a clear message that the police and the courts take this matter very seriously. I want to let all other victims of this crime know that I stand in solidarity with them, and I have absolutely no regrets on waiving my anonymity. I hope that this puts anyone off committing this sort of crime, and I hope for anyone else who's been victim of it, it gives them some sort of justice.
Mourners have lined the streets to pay respects to Leah Croucher, whose body was found in a house in Milton Keynes 4 years after she disappeared. A cortege for the 19-year-old has passed through Thurston in a public funeral procession. Thames Valley Police found human remains at a property last October following a tip-off from the public. Ms Croucher was last seen walking to work in February 2019. Neil Maxwell was found dead 2 months after Ms Croucher's disappearance. He remains the only suspect in the case. MP Neil Coyle has apologised in the House of Commons and said he's ashamed of his behaviour. That's after he was found to have breached Parliament's bullying and harassment policy. The independent expert panel has recommended a 5-day suspension for the former Labour politician. It follows reports of foul-mouthed and drunken abuse of another MP's assistant. He's also accused of bullying and harassing a parliamentary journalist. Both instances took place in a Commons bar. A Nobel Peace Prize winner and pro-democracy activist has been sentenced in a Belarus court to 10 years in prison for funding protests. Alice Bialyatsky, whose human rights group provided legal and financial aid to protesters during a 2020 wave of unrest in Belarus, has also been convicted of tax evasion. He claims he's being persecuted for political reasons. Russian news agency TASS, reporting on the sentencing, says the verdict's likely to be strongly condemned by the West. And it may well be March, but a cold weather alert's being issued for parts of the UK at the start of next week. The UK Health Security Agency says freezing temperatures and wintry showers are forecast across England from Monday, bringing with it a risk of ice. The Met Office, meanwhile, has issued a snow warning for parts of Scotland and the northeast of England. The cold snap's expected to last until midnight on Wednesday. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Arlene with the briefing.
Welcome to the show. Well, on Monday, the Prime Minister unveiled his breakthrough deal with the European Union on the Northern Ireland Protocol. The Windsor Framework, as it is called, was heralded by the PM as a very positive way forward in relations with the EU after a period of tension caused by the implementation of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me now is the DUP's Gordon Lyons. Gordon was formerly the Northern Ireland's Economy Minister, and it's on that issue that I want to start the interview, Gordon. You have been the former Economy Minister. This new deal, this Windsor Framework, does it make things easier for businesses in Northern Ireland?
Well, good afternoon, Arlene, and it could hardly make things any worse. The protocol was a terrible deal for Northern Ireland. That was something that we had warned against at its conception in 2019. And over the last number of years, we have continually warned about the problems that it would cause. And we've been proven right over that period of time. Unfortunately, if we cast our minds back to 2021, when the protocol was first implemented, the UK government said that there was no border in the Irish Sea. The Irish government and the EU said it was a great deal for Northern Ireland. And the other political parties in Northern Ireland actually wanted to see the protocol rigorously implemented and fully implemented. That meant that they wanted trade barriers between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, terrible for our economy. They wanted prohibitions on pets moving across the Irish Sea, on medicines moving across the Irish Sea, on trees moving from one part of the UK to another. And they wanted even to check our personal luggage as we moved from one part of the United Kingdom to another. It was utterly ludicrous. We knew that from the start, but nobody else listened to what we were saying, or listened to the warnings that were given about the damage that it would do to the economy. And it is only because of the work of the Democratic Unionist Party that we have continually highlighted this and took the action that we did in regards to the Assembly that we've now started to see some movement, started to see a realisation of the issues that exist. And thankfully, we have made some progress.
Yes, we've made some progress, and we've talked about some of the businesses welcoming the Windsor Framework. But of course, the protocol is not just about trade, it's also about sovereignty. And do you feel that the negotiations have dealt with that issue, which of course a lot of people in Northern Ireland will be wanting answers to as well?
And that's why it's so important that we are taking our time to look at all of the documents associated with the Windsor Framework, because we have political declarations, we have command papers, but importantly, we also have the legal text. And that's why it's so important that we take the time to make sure that the issues and the concerns that we have and that the people of Northern Ireland have are actually addressed. I have to say, I'm amazed at the attitude of some other political parties, Labour in particular, who before the agreement was even reached had said that they had supported it. This is a critical issue for Northern Ireland. We need to make sure that we're all aware of the detail and that we understand the detail, because this is going to have a huge impact on Northern Ireland over the coming years. And I think it's frankly irresponsible to come out and to say you're in favour or against it before the agreement was even signed. So we will be taking our time to make sure that we get this right, to make sure that the issues are addressed. Because remember, back in 2019, so many people were saying, oh, this is a fantastic deal, a fantastic opportunity for Northern Ireland. And that's been proven to be wrong. I think many of those who voted for the protocol now regret it, didn't realise what was in it, didn't realise the impact that it was going to have. And in the case of some political parties in Northern Ireland, they were more interested in defending the interests of the European Union than they were in defending the interests of people in Northern Ireland. And that's why it's so important that we take the time to get this right.
And Gordon, you've said you're taking your time, and we know that the DUP have been saying that they are taking their time, they're consulting, they want to look through all the details. And, you know, it's not just the Windsor Framework, there's all of the political declarations attached to that as well, and the legal text that have to be gone through. But do you think that the Prime Minister has tried to oversell the Windsor Framework? Would it not have been better to say, actually, we've achieved quite a lot, particularly in terms of trade, but there are some issues that we still haven't dealt with, and I want to be honest about that. Do you not think that would have been a better approach by the Prime Minister?
Well, of course, it's always better to be upfront and to be honest with people, and that's the problem that we have had with successive governments over the years. They have promised one thing and they have not delivered on it. I think back to the New Decade, New Approach agreement of 2020, when the government then said that they were going to deal with the border in the Irish Sea. So unionists, of course, are sceptical about what governments have told them in the past. They are sceptical now. And that is why we're going to make sure that we take the time to read through all of those documents that you have highlighted there, to make sure that the rhetoric of the Prime Minister matches up to reality. We have not, and we never have, taken a Prime Minister or a government on its word. We have always waited to see the action. That's why we have taken the decisions that we have in the past. It's why we didn't support the original protocol. Remember, we were told how wonderful it was and that we could just throw customs declarations in different forms in the bin. Well, we looked at the detail then. We realised that it wasn't the case, and it's the same now. We will take our time to make sure that, as I said, the rhetoric of the Prime Minister matches the reality.
And I listened to your colleague in the House of Lords, Lord Stodds, and he was taking on some people who were saying the DUP don't agree with anything that's put forward. Of course, that's not correct, as you will well know. We've been in power-sharing government when I was First Minister and when my predecessor was First Minister, and indeed Dr Paisley. So I know that the DUP wants power sharing, but are you saying to us that in regards your deliberations that you want to make sure that it is right for Northern Ireland, and that's why you're taking your time in relation to this? And can I ask you, just Gordon, where are you with those deliberations, and when do you think we'll have an answer in relation to the Windsor Framework?
Well, of course, those sorts of accusations are thrown at us all the time. I think it's part of a campaign to delegitimise our real concerns. We've seen a lot of that over the last number of years. But Nigel Dodds was absolutely right in what he said in the House of Lords, is that we have taken decisions. We have agreed to agreements in the past. I've already mentioned New Decade, New Approach. We think of deals over welfare reform, over policing and justice, St Andrews. Look back over the last 20 years, you will see that the DUP is always ready to do the right thing for the people of Northern Ireland. But we have to make sure it is the right thing. We haven't been involved in these negotiations. These have been negotiations between the European Union and the United Kingdom government. So it's only right that we take the time to make sure that what is being proposed is right for the people of Northern Ireland. We've never agreed to a bad deal. We're not going to start at that now. We're going to make sure that we get it right, because this is the future. It's about the future of the people of Northern Ireland. It's about the next generation. We don't want to have to come back to this in 6 months or in a year's time. We want to make sure that we get these issues resolved and get ourselves on that path towards progress and being able to sort out all the issues that we need to sort out in Northern Ireland. And I think most people will think it is sensible and right that on such a big issue that has plagued us for so long, that we take the time to make sure that we get the right outcome for the people of Northern Ireland. That's what we're about.
Gordon, thanks so much for joining us. I'm going to have to leave it there with some breaking news coming in now. And Constance Martin and Mark Gordon have been remanded in custody, charged with manslaughter. This is after a court heard the remains of a baby were found in a plastic bag under some nappies in an allotment shed in Sussex. The Metropolitan Police have said that they have both been charged with gross negligence manslaughter, concealing the birth of a child and perverting the course of justice. Well, joining me now is GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, over to you.
Arlene, the couple appeared in court number 1 here at Crawley Magistrates Court, their first court appearance since the Crown Prosecution Service decided to charge them last night with those 3 charges that you read out there. They both wore prison-issue grey tracksuits in the dock as they spoke only to confirm their names, their dates of birth, and the fact that they currently have no fixed address. They were arrested on Monday evening, just after 9:30 in the evening, after an eagle-eyed member of the public spotted them in a local convenience store in the north of Brighton. They dialed 999 and they were detained some 6 minutes later. That the end of almost 2 months of being on the run and mysterious circumstances. Their vehicle had been found abandoned and burned out on a lay-by on the M61 near Bolton on the 5th of January. And then after that, the police really released multiple appeals to try to find this couple because they were extremely concerned, because forensic analysis of that vehicle had shown them that Constance Martin had given birth to a baby just a day or two before that vehicle was found abandoned, either in the back of the vehicle or near to the vehicle at that time. So there was a great deal of concern, of course, for Constance Martin, but particularly for this newborn baby that had not, as far as authorities were concerned, received any kind of medical attention since it was born. The couple, there were sightings of them in Liverpool and down in Essex and in East London, and then in Newhaven in Sussex as well in the subsequent days, but they went off the radar really on the 8th of January, and there was no confirmed sightings from that point on until, as I say, that sighting at the convenience store on Monday night. In court, the charges were read out to the couple, the charges of manslaughter, of concealing the birth of a child, and of perverting the course of justice. They were not asked to enter pleas at this stage, but they were remanded back into custody for a second appearance, which this time will be at the Crown Court, the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey in central London on the 31st of March.
Mark, thanks very much for bringing us up to date on that very distressing case. That's Mark White, our Home and Security editor. So back to Northern Ireland, and whilst the political deliberations have taken the headlines, it's also important to hear from businesses and get their take on the Windsor framework. So I'm glad now to be joined by Glyn Roberts. He's the Chief Executive of Retail Northern Ireland, to discuss the impact this deal could have on businesses there. Glyn, thanks for joining us, and no doubt you've been going through all of the documents that I referenced there with Gordon. What do you make of the Windsor framework?
Well, Arlene, thank you for having me. I think it's a very detailed document, as Gordon rightly says. There's a lot of devil in the detail, and all I would say is that it's a wonderful way to spend your evenings reading the accompanying legal text. But I think that we give it an initial welcome, because we do believe that this moves us forward toward stability and certainty, which our members need. We don't just represent retailers, we represent wholesalers and suppliers to the sector. So it's important that this agreement works not just for them and throughout all the businesses in the supply chain, but also for consumers as well. And we're quite pleased at the increased number of our members now that will operate within the green lane, with hopefully radically reduced checks, radically reduced paperwork. But we're still going through the document. I absolutely understand the need for the DUP to go through this in detail, because it is an incredibly difficult and complex document. There's so many moving parts in it, and they're right to take the time to go through it.
Glyn, there's an old saying in Northern Ireland that you wouldn't start from here, and I think possibly nobody would have wanted to have started from the protocol, but I think what you're saying is that there's an initial welcome for this deal from businesses, but you have further questions, have you?
Yes, I think that certainly what we need to ensure is that constructive engagement that business has had really since get-go after the referendum, where we've been taking a very solution-based approach. We've been working with the UK government, working with the European Commission, and as you know yourself, working with the Executive and Assembly, putting forward ideas, solutions about how we can move things forward, because there were businesses that really did struggle with the protocol, other businesses that could adapt. But you know what we need is that stability and certainty, because we're ambitious for Northern Ireland. We want to see Northern Ireland the best place in the UK to locate, to start and to scale up a business. So I think it's important that we get this right. I hope that Windsor agreement allows us to move forward. And I hope that it also unlocks Stormont, because we do need our government back. We do need local ministers, because we shouldn't forget that we're obviously still dealing with a cost of living and a cost of doing business crisis. And we need all levels of government pushing in the one direction to support local businesses and obviously the jobs that they support as well.
Well, Glenn, we'll have to wait to see whether devolution does come back. But for the meantime, thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. Well, the legal age to get married in the UK was raised to 18 on Monday, and Conservative MP Pauline Latham has been campaigning and fighting to ban child marriage in this country for many years now, and we'll be joined by her in the show to discuss how she feels now it is a reality. But before that, let's have a quick break.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the briefing. Well, this week, the legal age of marriage has risen to 18 in England and Wales. Previously, people could be married at the age of 16 if they had parental consent. The bill will also prevent children being taken out of the country to be married. The bill was sponsored by Conservative MP Pauline Latham and Baroness Sugg in the House of Lords. And Pauline Latham joins me now to discuss the end of what has been a long campaign. Pauline, thank you for joining me. I suppose to explain to our listeners and to our viewers, why was this such an important issue that you decided to take up?
Well, I hadn't realised, really, nobody thought about it, that we allowed child marriage in the UK until I went to Bangladesh, where when we give international aid out to different developing countries, we ask them to stop child marriage. But when Bangladesh turned around and said, well, why should we listen to you? Because you do it. I realised actually then that we did have a problem and we couldn't go around preaching and asking people to change their laws if we didn't change ours. It took a long time to get through because many ministers felt that there were only a couple of hundred in the country each year it was relevant to. But what they hadn't realised was it's all the marriages where, as you said, taking out of the country to be married or having what are known as community marriages in the communities where it's not legal, but the parents and the children and the community believe it is, but they haven't legalised it by having a registrar there. Some of these children are not just 16 to 18, they are anything from the age of 10, 12 in England and Wales, and that to me was totally shocking when I realised that was happening, and that's why I got very determined that we were going to push this through. And the only way I could get it through was to get the government to support it, And I went to see Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister, and when he understood the problem, got right behind it and supported me all the way.
And just to explain to our listeners and our viewers, this was through a process called a private member's bill, which you put down. And ordinarily, getting private members' bills to become law is incredibly difficult, isn't it?
It is almost impossible. And I had tried it twice through the 10-minute rule bill, which you can still go through that route. But unless you've got government support to get it through, they will find a mechanism to talk it out. And that's what would have happened had I not got the government to agree that it was important, that it was something that our government needed to back in order to stop these children being not just forced into marriage, but coerced into it. And also people who have been brought up to believe it is what normally happens. Well, it isn't what normally happens in England and Wales. It's just a number of communities that it happens in, and it's wrong. It's child abuse, because very often these children are married to people who are 30, 40. Well, that's obscene, frankly.
Yeah. And you made the comment in your opening remarks that you had been on an international trip and you were challenging Bangladesh about their young people marrying older people, and they said back to you, well, actually, what about your own laws? Do you think that this will send a message in terms of our international work as well?
Yes, I think it will. I think we put our house in order in in England and Wales. Sadly, not in Northern Ireland or in Scotland yet. In Scotland, you can even get married without parental permission at the age of 16, which is too young in this day and age. But I think, yes, it will send a message that the British government were determined, where it had the powers, that it would change things. And because we've now put that into legislation, not just to stop it, but to prosecute people who arrange it. If you are a parent or an aunt or a grandparent and you arrange for a child to be married, you can go to prison for 7 years. And that doesn't matter. They can even go to Scotland or to Northern Ireland. But if they normally live in England and Wales and they come back, they can be prosecuted.
Yeah.
But what I'd really like is for Northern Ireland and Scotland to follow suit. So it's a one-country policy.
Thank you. I was just going to finish by saying I hope you've sent a very positive message to Scotland and Northern Ireland as well, because it would be great if this was right across the UK. But Pauline, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon, and congratulations and well done. Well, after the break, we will be joined by Police Commissioner Donna Jones. It's been 2 years since Sarah Everard's abduction, rape and murder. Has anything changed in tackling violence against women? And former Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be giving evidence to the Privileges Committee on the week commencing the 20th of March as part of the Partygate inquiry. Our political reporter Catherine Foster will be joining us to give us the latest on the political stories. But first, here's Rhiannon with your news headlines.
Arlene, thank you. It's 2:31. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Commons Privileges Committee says breaches of coronavirus rules in Downing Street would have been obvious to Boris Johnson at the time. The former Prime Minister is set to give evidence about Partygate and whether he lied to Parliament at the committee inquiry on March the 20th. Mr Johnson says it was his belief the rules and guidance had been followed and that there's no evidence he misled Parliament. Constance Martin and Mark Gordon have been remanded in custody, charged with manslaughter after the remains of a baby were found in a shed in Brighton on Wednesday. The pair appeared at Crawley Magistrates Court this afternoon, also accused of concealing the birth of a child and perverting the course of justice. They'll appear at the Old Bailey at the end of the month. A reality TV star has been sentenced to 21 months in prison for sharing online a private video of him having sex with his ex-girlfriend. Stephen Bear was accused of circulating CCTV footage of himself and Georgia Harrison having sex in his garden in August 2020. 28-year-old Miss Harrison, who's waived her right to anonymity, says she demanded the clip never be shared. Bear, who denies all charges, was found guilty of voyeurism as well as disclosing private films with intent to cause distress. And the King and Queen consort will make their first state visits to France and Germany at the end of the month. Buckingham Palace says the 6-day trip, beginning on the 26th of March, will celebrate Britain's relationship with both countries, marking shared histories, culture and values. The royal couple will travel to Paris and then onwards to Berlin. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Arlene.
Coming up in a few moments, our royal reporter Cameron Walker joins me in the studio to discuss the latest royal visit. And was it right for the King to meet with Ursula von der Leyen on Monday when she visited Windsor? All that after this break.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back to the briefing. Well, today marks 2 years since the horrendous abduction of Sarah Everard whilst walking home from a friend's home in Clapham. Everard was abducted, raped and murdered by Metropolitan Police Officer Wayne Cousins. Cousins is serving a whole life sentence behind bars. Joining me now to discuss the aftermath of all of that is the Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire, Donna Jones. Thanks, Donna, for joining me today. You'll remember the horror after that horrific crime took place, and the Home Secretary, Priti Patel at the time, said every woman should feel safe to work or to walk our streets without fear of harassment or violence. But people don't have that safety and security in their mind, do they, when they're walking late at night?
No, good afternoon, Arlene, and thank you for having me on to talk about such a key issue as this one. And what happened to Sarah Everard, as you've just said, was a tragedy, particularly, and it was made so much worse because it was one of the biggest breaches of trust. A serving police officer, a warranted police officer of the Metropolitan Police, serving Queen and Country as was then, and he betrayed the trust that was placed upon him by our government to do that role. I think so many things have happened in the last 2 years. It really has started a catalyst of people coming out and speaking about historic issues of sexual impropriety amongst police officers. It's brought about a review of the police vetting system. It's brought about questions of the Met Commissioners, their grip on turning the Metropolitan Police Force around. And of course, as you've just mentioned, the previous Home Secretary at the time, Priti Patel, who also then launched an app for women to be able to report areas in their communities where they didn't feel safe on the streets.
And it started that whole discussion again, didn't it, around violence against women and girls, and the consultation evidence that came in after this horrific incident really went exponential, and people wanted to talk about their experiences.
Yeah, and actually it has, when I talk about it, really, being a catalyst of change. The strategic policing requirements in England and Wales there have been 6 strategic policing requirements for a decade. And what has now happened, as of last Monday, we had the publication, the first time in 4 years, we had an update of the strategic policing requirements across, as I say, England and Wales. And we now have a 7th requirement, and that is violence against women and girls. So now every police force has a duty to have to make sure they have a recovery plan, an improvement plan. Police and crime commissioners must be holding chief constables to account. The Home Office will be monitoring this annually and quarterly. There's a whole load of stuff that now must be done. So violence against women and girls is now being treated the same as serious and organised crime, in countering terrorism, in drugs responses, knife crime. It really is being taken seriously. I welcome that as the national lead for victims, but I'm just very sad that we had to go through the terrible situation we had of Wayne Couzens victims, of what happened with Sarah Everard, of Sabina Nessa, of all of those women who have lost their lives or been raped and abused at the hands of men across Britain, but particularly those who are serving police officers. It's a travesty.
And I suppose what we want to see is a positive legacy for those people who have lost their lives in this way. And I think what we don't want to see is more process around this issue. We want to see actual change, isn't that right? Because this man was a serving police officer, it made it so much worse and really did damage trust amongst women for policing, particularly the Met Police. Do you think that has been tackled in an appropriate fashion, Donna?
I do. I really do. What I do want to make is a distinction between the Metropolitan Police Force and the other 42 police forces in England and Wales, because actually there is a greater fear on the streets of London from any kind of section taking away police officers in this one, because actually the vast majority of policemen and women, particularly policemen serving in the Metropolitan Police Force, are decent, good, honourable officers who are there to protect people. I really want to stress that fact. And actually police officers have been the most disturbed and affected by what's happened to Sarah Everard, because it's brought into question the integrity of the profession, and that is much more acute in London than it is in other police forces. But yes, still more does need to be done. And you'll recall, Arlene, years ago when there was the clunk click every trip, when the government ran a national campaign about wearing seatbelts. We've had the same with smoking, giving up smoking, anti-smoking campaigns. I think that's what now needs to happen when it comes to violence against women and girls. We need a national advertising campaign, government-led, to really drive home that sexual assaults, non-fatal strangulation, coercive and controlling behaviour, these things are not acceptable. Like smacking your children, they become social taboos. And by doing that, the government are in the absolute perfect organisation in this country to be leading that forward, to make violence against women and girls a taboo thing to happen, and so that other men and women call out bad behaviours when they see them happening.
Can I say you're absolutely right to talk about all of the other police officers who protect us every day of their lives and go out of their way to do that and put themselves in danger to do that. But can I just ask you in closing what role you think social media has in relation to violence against women and girls? Because you will know the online safety bill is being debated at the moment. There's a suggestion that we should have a code on violence against women and girls. Are you supportive of that, Donna?
Well, I am, and I've been involved with the Ministry of Justice in the pre-draft of the Victims Bill, which is slowly making its way through Parliament, very much like the serious violence duty that came into force on the 31st of January this year. The same will be happening with the new Victims Code. So I very much welcome that when it does eventually become legislation. Now, on the online harms bill, the online safety bill as it's now being called, I have a mixed response to this. I don't think it goes far enough, particularly to protect young people. So I think social media media, in answer to your question, has a huge part to play in changing social attitudes and behaviours around what is acceptable and what's not. But I also think that some of the content that is very unregulated, particularly on Snapchat, Instagram, on social media platforms used by young people, I think it needs to be a little bit more regulated to protect our children, because they are subjected to a lot of content which is definitely not appropriate for them.
Donna, thanks for answering that. It was a little one at the end. I couldn't resist there asking you about that online safety bill, but thank you so much for joining me and discussing violence against women and girls. Well, the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be given evidence to the Privileges Committee on the week commencing the 20th of March as part of the Partygate inquiry. Another day of revelation from the Telegraph's lockdown files. The latest messages show one of Matt Hancock's advisers asking if Nigel Farage could be locked up. Another shows Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, saying it was hilarious that 149 people had been quarantined. This comes as Sue Gray, the second most senior civil servant in the country, has resigned to take up the post of Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff. Sue Gray, as you will remember, conducted the report into parties occurring within government during the pandemic. So lots to talk about, and let's go now to GB News political reporter Catherine Foster. My goodness, Catherine, it's been a busy old week, hasn't it?
It really has. It began with Rishi Sunak selling his deal, the Windsor framework, as it was called, and it seemingly going down very well. Then we moved on to the COVID leaks, the 100,000 WhatsApp messages. Then Sue Gray, that led the Partygate inquiry, went across to work for Keir Starmer, or will be doing at some future point. And now today we hear that finally, the Privileges Committee, which has been looking for months into whether Boris Johnson knowingly misled Parliament over gatherings in Downing Street, is going to be speaking to him in the week commencing March the 20th. Now, the 24-page report is just an interim report. It doesn't reach any final conclusions. That will be some way down the line after Boris Johnson has given evidence. But it doesn't make for great reading for Boris Johnson. They have said there is evidence the House of Commons may have been misled, and breaches of guidance would have been, quote, obvious to Boris Johnson at several events he attended. And on one occasion, apparently, a leaving party, number 10, late 2020, Boris Johnson apparently said that it was probably the most unsocially distanced gathering in the UK right now. Now, for Boris Johnson's part, he's come out swinging. He's issued a statement in which he says he's been vindicated. He says that there's no evidence he knowingly or recklessly misled Parliament, and also takes a pop at Sue Gray because, of course, a lot of the evidence has come from the Sue Gray report, besides interviewing many, many other people for this and getting much more evidence beside, and saying that, you know, she has now been discredited. The report that she led has been discredited by the fact she's been appointed to work with Keir Starmer.
Yeah, and on that Sue Gray appointment, Catherine, that has caused quite a furore, hasn't it, around Westminster, because people are saying here was probably the best known civil servant because she had a lot of headlines in relation to what she was doing in relation to the report into Boris Johnson. And here she is jumping ship and becoming a political appointee.
Yes, a very surprising move. Now, Keir Starmer, obvious reasons why he wants her. She has vast experience of how government works. She's worked in Whitehall as a very senior civil servant for decades. And besides the Partygate inquiry, she was head of the proprietary and ethics team between 2012 and 2018. So she does have a lot of inside knowledge and confidential knowledge. So the Conservatives, many of them, especially Boris Johnson supporters, are absolutely furious at this appointment and saying it cast doubt on the impartiality of her report. Now, it's not clear when she will be able to take up the role. She left the Cabinet Office with immediate effect when she resigned yesterday, but it's likely that she won't be able to start for a minimum of 3 up to 2 years, and some pressure is being put on the Prime Minister to block the appointment or at least delay it till after the next election, though it's not clear at all, I think, that it will be delayed for that long.
Yeah, and of course, on the other side, Sue Gray was looking into COVID Partygate issues, and in relation to COVID, the Hancock story keeps rumbling on, doesn't it?
Yes, we're on day 3 of the COVID WhatsApp leaks that were given to the Telegraph newspaper. The first day was on care homes, the second day the focus was on education, and today a focus on the police. Matt Hancock referring to them as the plod, talking about giving them their marching orders. Also, he and Simon Case seemingly finding it entertaining when people had to quarantine. Simon Case talking about people being put into shoebox Premier Inns when they got off their first-class flight, and at one point saying it was hilarious. I doubt that many of the people who had to quarantine found it hilarious. So, and this again, of course, the police were cracking down on people's activities, people walking in the park with friends, people being issued with big fines at a time that we now know, because of Partygate, that people in the building behind me were breaching the guidelines that they themselves had made.
Catherine, stay with me, because today the independent panel of experts have recommended a 5-day suspension to Member of Parliament Neil Coyle from the House of Commons after 2 drunken confrontations in a Commons bar. He subsequently made a personal statement in response to the report, and he has apologised. Neil Coyle has sat down with Gloria De Piero for an interview and how he has been 1 year without drinking alcohol after being suspended from the Labour Party. In the interview, he talks about how he's trying to turn his life around, and if reinstated in the Labour Party, he will 100% not bring the party into disrepute again. Let's have a little listen.
Why should the Labour Party have you back?
Well, look, I won a seat for the Labour Party, and my track record actually is representing an incredibly diverse constituency, and I think doing it well. The response from constituency organisations when the news broke and allegations were made, I had the Somali group, I had the Afghan group, I had an
I bet Jeremy Corbyn could say all these things.
I'm sure he could. The difference between us is he's never apologised. So, I'm horrified that I left someone upset.
Well, you can watch the full interview on GB News' show Gloria Meets, where you'll find out who the person behind the politician is every Sunday at 6 p.m. Catherine, back to you. This apology that Neil Coyle made, that came today, didn't it?
Yes, it did, and he clearly is deeply, deeply sorry. So it's been recommended that he should be suspended from the House of Commons for a period of 5 days for 2 offences that occurred in the Strangers Bar in the Palace of Westminster when he was clearly under the influence of a lot of alcohol. He had the Labour whip withdrawn at the time. He's saying now fundamentally that it saved his life. He was drinking over 200 units of alcohol per week, and he is deeply sorry. He would like Sir Keir Starmer to give him the whip back. So it will be interesting to see what happens. Rupa Huck was given the whip back this week. She had made comments that were seen as completely unacceptable several months ago, had the whip withdrawn, and it has been given back. So we will wait to see what happens with Neil Coyle now.
Catherine, thanks so much for joining us. Catherine Foster, our political reporter, live from Downing Street. Well, earlier this week, King Charles was also brought into the diplomatic efforts to secure a breakthrough on Northern Ireland. It has also been announced in this past few hours that the King and Queen consort will be visiting France and Germany for a state visit at the end of the month. And I'm delighted to say that I'm joined in the studio now to discuss all things royal with GB News royal reporter Cameron Walker. So, Cameron, first of all, in relation to that set-up, if you like, between the King and Ursula von der Leyen, the People's Poll doesn't really see a big issue with it, does it?
No, they don't. Only 8% of the British public think there was a problem with the King meeting Ursula von der Leyen so soon after the Northern Ireland Brexit agreement was discussed between Ursula von der Leyen and the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. I think even before the meeting, there was definitely challenges for Buckingham Palace to try and not get drawn into political controversy. According to Downing Street sources, they seem to be implying that it was up to the palace for the King to meet Ursula von der Leyen. But from speaking to a spokesperson at Buckingham Palace, they are insisting that they are only acting on government advice. So the question is, who exactly are we meant to believe? Clearly, the King is a constitutional monarch, so he cannot be involved in any political controversy and certainly cannot have a political opinion. From Buckingham Palace's perspective, a wide range of topics was discussed, including war in Ukraine, climate change. It was that power of soft diplomacy the royal family and the monarch had in action. But clearly, I think many people, yourself included, are pointing out the controversy because it happened just a few hours after that Brexit deal was kind of agreed.
It was the choreography, I think, that people were concerned about. Certainly I was concerned about bringing His Majesty the King into a political realm, if you like, when of course he is above party politics and stays above that. And I was interested in the poll that even though 8% opposed it, 34% didn't know or preferred not to say. So it wasn't really something that entered into their consciousness. I think it would be slightly different if you took that poll in Northern Ireland, Cameron, but maybe I'm biased in relation to that.
I'll leave that up to you.
But tell us all about the state visits to France and Germany.
Yes, so Buckingham Palace have announced in the last few hours that the King and Queen Consort are going on a state visit. Their first, of course, is in the new reign, to France and Germany. They're going to be visiting Paris, Bordeaux as well, and in Germany they're going to be in Berlin and Hamburg. Again, it's that power of soft diplomacy, isn't it, in action? It's understood, and as it always is custom with these things, it was the British government's request for the King and Queen Consorts to go on this state visit. They had also received invitations from both the Presidents of France and Germany. A wide range of engagements are planned, including lots on sustainability and climate change. We know that King Charles is very keen on that, but a lot about Ukraine as well, and that idea of the shared values and interests, as they describe it, we have with our European neighbours.
And it's sending a very powerful message, isn't it, that the first state visit is to our next neighbours, isn't that right?
Yes, exactly. Some people have questioned why their first state visit isn't to a Commonwealth realm, as clearly he's head of state in 15 other countries around the world. From my understanding, it was thought that perhaps, clearly it's quite close to the coronation, they're both in their 70s, so geographically it seems to be a lot easier, but also, as I said, as a British government, from the British government's perspective, it is very much they see France and Germany as the key points here for the first state visits. This is not Buckingham Palace's decision, but it is a packed number of engagements. I think there's between 25 and 30 or something engagements, so it's a lot to pack in 6 days.
Yeah. Cameron, as ever, thank you so much for bringing us up to date. And you've been watching The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster. I'll see you again on Sunday when I'm filling in for Michael Portillo at 10 a.m. But up next, it's Patrick Christie's.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Much colder weather is on the way for next week, but for the time being, well, it's similar to the last few days. Dry for most, some brighter skies into the north. Also feeling quite chilly, but with light winds and some sunshine coming through, actually in a few spots. Not too unpleasant, and the brightest skies for the rest of Friday will be across parts of Scotland, the cloud breaking up somewhat, and some sunny spells coming into the north of England as well. I think we'll keep a lot of cloud elsewhere, but for the vast majority it is dry. A few showers affecting the far north of Scotland, in particular Orkney, and temperatures roughly similar to the last few days, 7 to 9 Celsius. Then into the evening, we'll see those clearer spells in the north tend to develop a bit more widely and drift further south as well, where we do get clear spells, of course. Temperatures will fall, and we'll see a frost in places, but we'll hang on to a lot of cloud actually for southern and eastern areas, Northern Ireland. And northern Scotland will see some showers arrive by the end of the night as well. Those showers will be falling as sleet and snow over the hills, but rain at lower levels. Now into the start of Saturday, it's very similar to Friday. We'll see the brightest skies across central and southern Scotland, some sunshine into western parts of England as well as Wales, but an increased signal for some showers around some of these North Sea coasts, northern Scotland as well. And it's going to start to feel colder. Temperatures are beginning to fall away at this stage for Shetland in particular. That's where the cold air is coming from. Northerly winds starting to arrive later Saturday, and we'll likely see a few flakes of snow across Shetland as those northerly winds dig in. But the cold air sweeps nationwide on Sunday and into Monday. Chances of some snow in places mainly around coastal areas.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss? Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to GB News with me, Nana Akwe. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm in for Patrick Christie's. Now, on the menu, just when you thought that Boris Johnson would quietly slip into the shadows and perhaps his only worry would be opposing Rishi Sunak's deal with Ursula von der Leyen, I still can't get over the way she sort of looked at him. She was very coy, like pussycat-like, wasn't she? Partygate is back on the agenda.